And welcome back to the Lookout. Today is Sunday the 13th of July. It's a little smoky here in Chico this morning. We're going to check out the three main fires we've been covering. Two of them are very active, and the third is kind of not doing much. So then we'll kind of talk around them a bit also, and then talk a little bit about the interview we just posted with Patty Grantham, who retired from the Klamath National Forest as the forest supervisor. So welcome back. I want to thank our sponsors. We've got Q-Tech, maker of fine slip-in pumps and fire engines, Water Axe pumps, the standard in wildland fire, and Firebox, makers of skid steer attachments for fire suppression, prescribed fire, and land management. Appreciate their support. And if you're interested in becoming a Lookout sponsor, get a hold of me via thelookout.org. All right, so we're going to go right into the maps here. And we're going to check out, let's start off actually just by looking at the smoke. This job, turns out, involves lots of tabs, open tabs all the time. So this morning we've got smoke from the green fire. It's got kind of a northerly push. Part of that's the larger atmosphere. Part of that is the down canyon winds overnight. A lot of smoke coming off green, pouring down kind of towards Red Bluff. Up here in the Butler Fire, you can see the smoke is hanging in the canyons. Oh, it's still loading itself for this other one. Over the course of the day, we usually see the smoke start to peel out of these deep canyons like the Klamath and the Salmon River. Sometimes it never does. That smoke and its kind of presence or absence over the fire is one of the biggest impacts on fire behavior this time of year, when we're under kind of stable, high pressure, stable atmosphere, hot weather. So a lot of smoke from these fires. Looking at Round Mountain camera, it's smoky out there. It's not as smoky as it's been all the time, but look how breezy it is up here at Round Mountain right now, kind of with that north wind. Pretty vigorous. So that's scrubbing out some of that smoke. So today is a big day on the green fire. We've been talking on the green for a while now about potential strategies for containing it, timing of firing operations, and they've had quite the extended window with the fire spread to get the fire lines done. So just coming out real quick to give you the big picture of where we're at here. We've got Redding over here. We've got Bernie out here. We got Highway 299. And the Shasta Lake out here. In this map, the green is areas that have burned in the last 20 years. Last 15 years, really. And blue are areas that have burned in the last 5. So here on the fire, we've got kind of Pit River arm of Lake Shasta that's defining the kind of southern flank. We've got the kind of Sulanharas arm, formerly known as the Squaw Creek arm of the lake, coming up here towards the Shoe Fire. Sulanharas Creek runs down kind of the west side of the Shoe Fire and then down into here. And then we've got Fender's Ferry Road running kind of right up, straight up through here. And so as far as the fires spread right now, yesterday the fire ran pretty hard to the south. Actually, the day before yesterday. So you see this white line out here? The heavy white line is where the fire was 24 hours ago. And so you can see it's kind of back down towards the lake. The day before, the day before yesterday, the fire really burned out this whole bowl on Brock Mountain. Big run. That was the kind of mushroom clouds we saw. So yesterday the fire was pretty much backing off of Rock Mountain to the south. And the fire kind of spread evenly in most directions yesterday. Late in the day, the fire, kind of in the evening, the fire made a run up out of Flat Creek. And this is Rip Gut Creek here. And Rip Gut's kind of the critical drainage we've been watching because they've been constructing dozer line and hand line on this ridge between Rip Gut and Fender's Ferry Road. And we've been really watching that to see, the critical question was, would they have time to get fire on the ground here on these lines before the fire gets established here in Rip Gut and makes a run up out of there? So it's really been taking its time. It's made little runs out of Flat Creek, and then it's, like in the last 24 hours, you can see that the fire here in Rip Gut Creek, only spread maybe 200 yards downhill into Rip Gut, where it's come over from Flat Creek. So that's been good. This kind of northerly push and lack of much wind, and having wind be largely from the north when it's been happening, has bought them time to finish this line. But the fire is definitely well established into Rip Gut Creek now, and it's kind of just a matter of time until it makes a run. And so they might have another day or two, just looking at how slowly the fire's been spreading. You look at that 24 hours of spread there, extended on here. It's like, well, it might hang up here in the riparian area for another day, but it also might, depending on, it's only kind of a strong kind of couple hours of wind away from being established enough that it can run here in Rip Gut. So time's ticking. It sounded like they started firing at Goose Gap last night, and I don't know exactly what that means. If they're firing here between their new lines and the shoe fire, or if they're turning the corner and coming down and starting the fire this ridge system that's going to come down and be the main box on this side. So we've kind of been talking about that a lot. The white lines on here are either planned or existing fire lines. So kind of for orientation here, we're looking at the east side, the west side of the fire, and you've got kind of the arm of Lake Shasta, Sulanharas Creek, Squaw Creek, before they changed the name, coming up here, and that arm kind of forms a fire barrier as long as you're in the kind of lake influence. And then pretty soon you get into the kind of this creek bottom, which is less fire barrier-y. The original strategy was, I think, to hope to use the O2 road here south from Chirp Chatter Creek as the primary fire line. And we've talked a lot on here about how that's problematic as far as holding a fire on a mid-slope road that you can have roll out and burning material roll across the road. So it's kind of hard to tell at the scale of mapping, but it appears that the fire has kind of crossed over that road in several spots and is getting down towards the creek. Up here towards Chirp Chatter Campground, the fire's backing slowly down, but it hasn't reached the road yet. So based on where it's spread in the last 24 hours, expect it's going to be down the road all the way through here today. They've been working on dozer line over here on the ridge between Daedalus Creek and Sulanharas as kind of a plan B in case it does get across their lines and across the kind of the lower part of Sulanharas Creek here. All in all, it's pretty interesting to me that, and I think it's a good lesson that fires can actually spread pretty slowly even when it's 110 degrees and just dry as can be if you don't have much wind and if you have broken topography. So like I said, today's kind of a critical day. The next 48 hours will kind of determine whether or not they're going to hold it here on this ridge. As we've said, that if the wind continues to be kind of northerly, it's good for them as far as using helicopters to support their firing here and to pick up spots because the smoke will be blowing away from this side. So oftentimes on a fire, you've got like one flank that's beneficial or optimal for aircraft because the smoke is blowing away from it. And then oftentimes, the smoke is packed in and like one whole side of the fire, you just can't use aircraft. So we'll watch that, see where that goes. Kind of in the big picture here, they're looking at prepping roads farther out as kind of contingency line. There's also kind of planned dozer line on the other side of the river in contingency in case the fire gets across the lake and comes up. There's also fire boats working on the lake with pumps to help control the fire as it backs down the lake, or to pick up things if it gets across. In the big picture, we've got the Bagley fire up here that burned in 2012 that could burn again. We've got the Shoe fire in blue that won't burn because it burned last year. And not a lot of other kind of major landscape scale control features kind of between the fire and Bagley if it kind of gets across Fender's Ferry. So this is kind of a slow motion fire, and we'll just keep watching it. I'm going to go to Butler Fire now. What's up, Steinberg? Thanks for jumping on. Butler's doing its thing in a pretty big way. So if we look at this, yellow areas are areas that are cooling down. This fire, Butler, just to give you orientation, is between the coast and Mount Shasta. So here's Eureka down here at the bottom, and Wairika up here at the top, and kind of halfway down. So we got Highway 299. Once again, you've got your 5-year-old fires in blue and your 10-year-old fires in 10 to 15-year-old fires in green. You got 299 coming across to Weaverville, and you've got from Willow Creek, you've got Highway 96 that goes up to Klamath River to Wairika. So about halfway up 96, you've got the Salmon River watershed. Salmon River's had a lot of fire in the past 3 decades, but the other side of the river here from Butler hasn't had any fire for a long time. Like there's 35,000 acres on the other side of the Salmon River that hasn't had fire for like over 20 years. And so that's concerning in that if this fire does get established on the other side of the river, it's in this really tough terrain, and it could make head fire runs, high severity head fire runs up into these areas that haven't burned for a long time. And kind of ironically, we've been watching the Summit fire here for a couple weeks and talking about whether or not, it should have been a high priority to put it out. It's not out of the question that if Butler gets across here and well established, it could burn all the way to Summit anyway. And a lot of this stuff we've been kind of arguing about would be a moot point because the fire could be well established out here in this 8-year-old burn. But it could, it's unburned all the way from Summit basically down to the Butler fire. There's patches. One thing I wanted to talk about a little here is just that we've got this map here shows fire overlaps. And so there's places out in here that have had 5 fires in the last 100 years. There's places that have had 3. Areas that are blue have 1 or 2. But when you see these kind of, this is fire country, right? You've got quite a few places out here that have had 5 fires in the last 50 years. So coming down here, Butler, and so like this area here up on Orleans Mountain is one of those places that's had 5 fires. So I'm just going to turn back on the fires here that have happened in the last 15 years. So we got the white line here on Butler. We got Butler Flat, where folks did some prescribed fires last week to clean up. And the infrared here shows the fires down to the Salmon River Road in several places. And there were a couple spots across the river yesterday. A lot of this fire is just kind of backing. But on the infrared here, you see some good examples of what we've been talking about with fires making runs and then flanking. Head fire run here up last night when they were shooting this kind of around midnight. The fire was making kind of a slope-driven run up into here. A lot of this stuff here is like on the green where it's just kind of backing slowly, which often gives us good fire effects. And then down here is the Salmon River Road, which is kind of the kind of road that you'd imagine like riding in a rickety bus in Pakistan or something. It's a third world experience. and then the fire spotted across Nordheimer Creek here, and back down to the Salmon River. One of the problems they're having on this fire is that they've closed the road because of rolling material, but they're kind of in the process of trying to move the fire camp from somewhere downriver, upriver here to like Forks of Salmon, I think. So it's tough. Yesterday reading there, like trying to get rafting companies up here to ferry firefighters across the spot fires, but the rafting companies were downriver and they couldn't get up through the closure, and things unfold really slowly when you start like mobilizing hundreds of people to try to fight fire in this country. You get traffic jams, you get, the food truck breaks down on the road and then no one can get through or whatever. So yeah, you get some random like semi-truck driver from San Jose that is coming to bring food for the caterer who like has never driven on a mountain road, and then he ends out on the worst road in the world. So this isn't a really friendly place for, modern day organized firefighting. Anyway, like we said, there's still potential this fire could kind of get across the river and eat a lot of land that hasn't burned, but in the big picture it's still also contained on this whole side by fires that are less than 5 years old. So the thing to watch on this fire is whether or not it spots across the river and becomes established and becomes a much more complex season-long fire. So if we come around and look up towards the Scott Valley here, Wairika, Etna, Fort Jones, we've got the Summit Fire. It's still not really doing much. When this fire first started, we said, hey, they're not gonna put it out down here at the bottom. It's gonna burn most of this basin, and it's slowly doing that. This side of the fire seems to be done. Hasn't spread for a couple days, but the white line here is where the fire was yesterday, and you can see that it's kind of grown a little bit, and then this red is stuff that's new that was intense burning last night. So kind of patching its way through these stringers of red fir, making little slope-driven runs in kind of light fuels, and that's pretty much it. We don't see any spots over the mountains here. One thing I talked about, so I want to jump into talking about the interview we just did with Patty Grantham. One thing that she said, so we were talking about, here's the wilderness in green, the bright green line is the wilderness boundary for the Marble Mountains. And then, so one thing Patty said was, we were talking about the difficulty in using fire as a management tool in the Klamath, and this problem that the fires that if they burn out of the wilderness, they're immediately on private timberland. And a lot of this private timberland is just not wildfire resilient at all. This is the Shelley Fire from last year. The history of this land is that they over the last 100 years, they've cut all the big trees, and then lots of small trees grow up in the kind of new openings that are established when you remove the big trees. And you just have like this landscape that's kind of dominated by small trees, heavy fuels, and that the private timberland companies aren't able to do anything really at scale about fuels management because they're scared to use prescribed fire. Because if they do and they lose it up the hill into the forest, then they're going to get a big bill, and it's just not easy to do. So she said that, in her opinion, like one of the problems here is just that when they drew this particular wilderness boundary, they drew it right up against private timberland, and that's just a recipe for kind of perpetual kind of management conflict. She thought that if they would have, at least backed off the wilderness boundary, maybe create a buffer of a couple miles of general forest before you got to private timberland, at least then the Forest Service might have some sort of management option to like maybe log or thin or burn that boundary. But since they can't, Forest Service can't do anything kind of mechanical on this side of the line, and so it's pretty hard to like say, oh, we're going to manage this wilderness fire, because it's going to be really hard to stop that fire like right at the wilderness boundary if you haven't been able to kind of come in and log and thin and burn. the whole concept of prescribed fire in wilderness areas is actually kind of fraught. Like, some wilderness advocates consider putting prescribed fire on the ground in wilderness to be like trammeling, and wilderness is supposed to be where, the footprint of man is, impermanent and unmanaged land in a lot of people's definition. So just even the idea of like going out and lighting prescribed fires in wilderness, some people think that is kind of trammeling or potentially even illegal. It seems, from what I've heard, that you can manage wilderness, but you can't like go out and graze wilderness just because you want to sell grazing leases. You can do management in wilderness if it's intended to preserve the wilderness character of that land. Anyway, it's complicated. So we did an interview yesterday with Patty Grantham, and we talk a lot about this kind of margin. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you should check it out. It's on our YouTube, and it'll be linked at the end of this. So I think the last thing to talk about, now that we've kind of covered the basics of what the fires are going on, is kind of language and messaging. If we come back here to the green fire, I saw a post on Facebook from a guy named Royal Burnett, who's a retired CAL FIRE firefighter and forester, and he also was kind of one of CAL FIRE's kind of most well-known prescribed burn leaders back in the 70s and 80s when they did more prescribed fire. And Royal and I, there's a lot of things we don't agree on, but one of the things that Royal is saying is that it's kind of ridiculous for the Forest Service to insist that they're using full suppression on a fire like green. They're saying that they're doing full suppression on all these fires. And in theory, that's true. Like, you've got the lake out here, and so they decided the lake would be their fire line, and they would let the fire burn this 13,000 acre peninsula, and that would consist of full suppression. One of the reasons that they're letting it burn out there is because it's achieving resource benefits, and they can't say that. Forest Service can't use the word resource benefit in the same paragraph as wildfire, because that's super voodoo and a lot of people don't like it. So kind of the national messaging on wildfire is don't use the word resource benefit ever, and say full suppression always. So technically, yes, this is a full suppression fire in that they've got a line around it that was created by the lake, and you could say that this part of the fire is already contained in some kind of sense. But they're letting this fire burn. They don't have a lot of great options to stop this fire out here. They've got a lot of resources right now, and if they wanted to, they could likely have implemented a different strategy to keep this fire from burning this 13,000 acres. But they didn't, because this is all prescribed fire country. They've done a ton of prescribed fire out here. They're saying it's going to burn this prescribed fire, and that's going to be fine. Well, it's going to burn out in this prescribed fire, and it's going to keep burning. It's not like this is Gobi Desert or a salt flat. This fire is largely going to be, when we look at the imagery after it's done, we're going to see that it did a lot of good work in thinning out the forest, benefiting the oak woodland out here. Like, all in all, like, I'm happy that this is going to burn, because it's going to be good for that ecology. But the language is effed up. For the Forest Service to say, this is full suppression fire, we're not managing this. Like, the public information officer for the Shasta Trinity National Forest told me straight up, and I said I'd quote him on it, we're not interested in managing this fire for resource benefit. And that's just flat up not true, right? Like, the resource officers on the forest are glad that this is burning because it's their prescribed fire area. They wanted to put prescribed fire in here anyway, and this is going to be good for their program, right? It's going to be good for their forest. It's good for the wildlife. It's good for the oaks. But they can't say that. They can't say we're managing this fire for resource benefit, because that's against the rules. And so they keep telling us it's full suppression. And in doing that, they're kind of watering down the definition of full suppression. I think that people want a more honest answer. We could say this fire is being managed with an indirect strategy, which is correct. They're not fighting directly. But we need to be more explicit. when you say everything's full suppression, even if we're going to let it burn 13,000 extra acres, that's just kind of not honest. It's true. It's technically correct, but it's not the same as saying we're backing off and letting it burn to the lake because we think that's the right thing to do, which would be owning it. So they're in a tough place because they're getting direction from above not to use certain words, to use other words. But in the process, they're kind of like treating the public like we're idiots. And so I don't appreciate it. I think that we should just have this conversation, say like, hey, we're letting it burn out on the peninsula because it's the right thing to do. It is safer, it's better for the land. And yeah, there's going to be smoke. There's going to be more smoke. And that's the price that we're asking people to pay. Because the smoke is a real issue. You can't get around that. You can't get around that. Like, this fire is having smoke impacts. You know, it's smoky where I live. It's smoky when you look at the satellite. This smoke here is coming from this fire, and it's spreading across all of Northern California. And if you're playing soccer in Redding today, like, they might cancel your game. And we want you to be all right with that because that's what our forests need. Like, that's the messaging we need. Those are the conversations we need to have. So, if you watch Lookout, you know kind of my perspective on this. Fires. Some fires are good. This is not without risk, right? And I'm not saying that they. I'm not going to tell you that they should have stopped this when they could, because they could have, right? They're picking a strategy that's got a high likelihood of success. When we look at how this fire boiled out over Brock Mountain, like the other day, like, I wouldn't have wanted to be the person that decided that we were going to put crews on this ridge to hold the fire from burning out on this peninsula that needs fire anyway, knowing that a good down canyon wind and a fire burning in this inaccessible, broken area below was going to come boiling out of here. Because when this came out of here as a mushroom cloud fire, you don't want people out in front of that. But we got to, I think, just be honest about the language. Right. But trying to pick up the fire down here in this, like, crazy, roadless, super broken, thick country that hasn't had fire for a long time, putting people up on top of this ridge and saying, like, all right, catch it when it comes up the hill. Like, well, that's not a good strategy either. But I think the Forest Service could be a little more transparent about that there are resource benefits from this fire, and they should claim them. Anyway. All right. So it looks like some good comments going on. I'm out of town the rest of the day, so we won't have a broadcast tonight. If things get kind of hopping, we might do something from the road. We'll keep an eye on this. We'll get back to you. In the meantime, check out our interview with Patty. I think it was interesting. Whether you love the Forest Service, hate the Forest Service, she's seen a lot in her career, and I think it's worth checking out her story. And that best way to see that is on our website. You can check it out directly on YouTube, but you can also check it out on our website, where I've used a robot to kind of summarize it. So if you don't have time to watch or listen to the whole thing, you can check out what the robot thought was important. While you're there, check out our merch, blah, blah, blah. Check out our sponsors at WaterX, QTech, and I guess we'll play the video again. Thanks for supporting Lookout, and hope you all have a good weekend.